Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. In our previous video, we had an incredibly instructive amateur game which got a lot of likes. I think people thought that the learning out of that particular game was really good. And this is really another one of that same kind of genre where, you just don't learn some of these things from watching master games where they don't do these things. But of course, amateurs make amateur mistakes, and learning from others' mistakes is a really good way to hopefully make yourself a little bit better so that you have less chance of making those same mistakes. All right, let's take a look at this game. White plays d4, black plays knight f6, white plays c4, black plays e6. Now if white plays knight c3, bishop b4 is the Nimzo Indian. If white plays knight f3, black has a variety of defenses. Knight f3, black chooses c5, which is kind of a Benoni. The main way to play against the Benoni is to push the pawn to d5. White does that. Black plays the strange move bishop to d6. The main move there is to trade the pawns and then either fianchetto the bishop right away or maybe play d6 and then fianchetto the bishop. That's the main line. To put the bishop on d6 is pretty strange. Okay. This brings up the possibility that maybe later on white can get his pawn up to e5 and fork the bishop and the knight, so we have to look for those things. White plays knight c3, logical move to support e4. Black plays a6. a6 to support the break move b5 is a common move in the Benoni. Here he's probably also doing it so that the knight can't go to b5 and attack the bishop. White plays e4, so already e5 is a threat. Black has to meet that threat. He could just play e5 himself. He plays queen c7. All right, so already we're looking at, is there ways that we can entice those pieces to move to squares where we can do something against them? Can we play e5, bishop takes e5, d6, or bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5, and attack the queen? We're looking for ideas like that already. White plays bishop to d3. Black castles. Now when white plays e5, he gets the added bonus of putting the bishop on that diagonal toward the king. White castles. White's getting ready to probably put a queen or a rook on the e-file and then threaten to play e5. Black's in some trouble here already thanks to that strange bishop d6 move. It's kind of hard to get the rest of his pieces out. Black takes the pawn. Now if white takes this way and creates a symmetric pawn structure, white doesn't have that much of an advantage. I on purpose made the board a little smaller so we could see the computer analysis. Let's turn it on right now and let's look at the evaluation. If white takes back not at all with bishop g5, he has the biggest lead. If he does take with the pawn, you can see that taking with the c-pawn is much better. Taking with the e-pawn is, well, here it's not even in the top 5. Let's keep expanding here. Okay, so c takes d5 compared to e takes d5, the difference is roughly a pawn. That's a pretty big difference. So in this game, we'll bring it back down to the top 2 moves. In this game, white plays it correctly. He takes toward the middle. He has more center pawns. e5 still remains a little bit of a threat. Black plays b6. Normally, black plays something like b5 here and then tries to expand with his 3-on-2 queenside majority. b6 is a little bit passive. White now plays rook e1, threatening to play e5. All right, so black has to stop it. Black has a bunch of moves that could do that. Stockfish says no matter how he stops it, white's completely winning by now, up about 6 2/3 pawns. Black plays c4 and hits the bishop. Now, white could, if he wanted to, he could take the pawn and then push his e-pawn. But he doesn't need any crazy stuff right here. He has so many strong threats that it makes more sense just to play the move he did in the game, which is back the bishop off, keep the bishop on that diagonal toward the king. Don't give up, sacrifice to win back material. Just keep the threats going with all the pieces on. White's way ahead in development. His pieces are not only better placed, but his king is actually much safer in this position. So black plays the bad move, bishop to e5. And now if white wants to win the bishop pair, he could play something like knight takes, queen takes, f4, and then get the pawns rolling in the middle. Notice the engine says if you do that, even though the material right now is completely even, white has the bishop pair. I guess I shouldn't say it's completely even. Even though it's completely even here, white is up by about 8.2 pawns. So you can't always trust the engine evaluation. Here, white has a massive advantage because his pieces are much more active. He can expand his center pawns and force the knight away and go after a mating attack. Just for the fun of it, let's play the best moves for both sides. Stockfish says queen h5 is best. White should hit that knight. Black has to trade queens. White would take back with the bishop. The knight would go back to e8. White plays knight a4, hitting this pawn. If black tries to save the pawn, white forks the bishop and the rook. Black has to lose the exchange here. He doesn't want to lose a whole piece. I see a lot of lower rated players losing entire pieces instead of the exchange. It's much better to guard the rook. And here Stockfish says, oh, I don't need to take the rook yet. I'll just continue my big lead in development. Black tries desperately to get out of there. Stockfish doesn't even want to play knight takes a8 here. He wants to play a4. Well, you get the idea. White's killing black. Back to the game. Okay, but white sees something very clever here. He sees that if he sacrifices a pawn, he wins a piece with either removal of the guard or with a fork. So he plays the very nice move, which, by the way, Stockfish says the best move is to just take the bishop. But white says, oh, I can win a piece. I'll play there. Now, if the queen moves anywhere except for taking this pawn one way or the other, then knight takes e5 is going to win a piece. So black's forced to take the pawn, but if he takes with the queen, white can just trade queens, and that gets the bishop off the blockading square, and then e5 wins a piece. Or he could play what he did in the game, take with the bishop, and now e5 wins a piece anyway. So now white's up a piece for a pawn or two, and this game is just about over because white still has that big lead in development. He still has these Lopez bishops pointing toward the king side, and he has the advantage in material, in development, in power of the pieces. He has the advantage in every which way. So black says, I'll get the pawn for it. White takes with the knight. Black develops his bishop. White develops his bishop to g5, threatens to take the knight and open up the king. For instance, let's say black doesn't do anything here. Suppose he plays knight c6. Bishop takes f6. If pawn takes, queen g4 check. King h8. Excuse me, queen f5. And it's an unstoppable mate on h7 on the next move. Okay, so back to the game. So bishop takes f6 is a big threat here. Black stops the threat by playing queen to d8. Okay, so it's white's move here, and white is ahead in material. He's ahead in king safety. He's ahead in position. He's ahead in every possible way. What could white do? Well, the best move, as you can see from the computer here, is knight g4, threatening to take that knight and opening up the king anyway. And black has no defense. He can't put a bishop on e7. He can't guard that knight with another piece. He can't play knight bd7. And white's just going to take on f6 and open up the king. And I think the computer says he's actually forcing the win of either mate or winning the queen. Well, I don't have to go through that. If you want to stop the video, set it up on your engine. You know, that's not the purpose of this particular video. But take it from me, knight to g4 is a strong move. But the point is, white doesn't have to do that. Suppose white just says, I'm ahead in material. I have a better position. Suppose he plays a move like queen d6 just to block in this pawn. And then plays rook on a to d1. Let's say black plays, I don't know, knight c6. And now let's say white just plays rook a d1. Well, white's only, I put in quotes, ahead a piece for 2 pawns. But look at Stockfish's evaluation. It says white's ahead by 8.5 pawns if he just does this. Or, let's go back to the game. White could just say, I only have 1 pawn for my knight. Let's take another pawn and get 2 pawns for the knight. And even though that does allow black to play d5, I'll just put my knight back on e5. and I have an extra piece for a pawn with a monster position. And here again, you can see the engine saying, if you just do this, if you just take the pawn and bring your knight back, you're up by almost 10 pawns here. My point here is that you don't need to find the put-away move, knight to g4, to win the game. If we show the top, I don't know, 6 or 7 moves, maybe more. There we are, top 7. Notice, except for the first move, which is 11, number 2 through number 7 are all around 9.5 to 9 pawns ahead. Well, what does this tell you? It tells you you're winning no matter what you do. As long as you don't make a move that's not safe, if you make any kind of reasonable move, if you develop your pieces, if you capture the pawn, you're killing black. You're just going to win if you make normal moves. In that sense, this is not a critical position. You have lots and lots and lots of ways to win this game easily. To understand that you're killing him and you don't have to do a lot here to win the game easily is a big, important lesson to learn. The other lesson to learn is that the evaluation by using, let's say, the Reinfeld method of just counting the pieces here, if you say, I have a knight for 2 pawns, I'm only up 1 point, or 1 pawn, however you like to measure, whatever your unit is, and you say, I'm only up 1, that's not a big advantage. I need something really important here to try to win because I'm not winning by that much. That would be a terrible way of looking at this because, as the engine is showing you, even if you don't play knight to g4, and you just play almost any other reasonable move, you're killing black. You're so far ahead because you're not only ahead in material, you're ahead in development, you're ahead in king safety, you're ahead in everything. So your lead here is actually, you don't treat this kind of position as a very small lead, you treat this position as a monstrous lead. But you also have to understand that you really don't need to do a lot. You don't want to spend 10 minutes on this move trying to put him away. That's not necessary. Pretty much everything wins. If you understand that, then you could just play a simple move, as I said, knight takes c4, simple move. I kind of like developing the queen and bringing the rook into the game. Playing a move like this really creates all kinds of problems for black. And of course, if you just say, I'll just take the pawn, that's plenty good too. All those moves are really good. You don't need to really put them away. Yes, if you do, that's nice. But when you have all those moves that give you such a monstrous advantage, you're not just winning easily, but you're winning easily without having to find the perfect line. And we'll see later in the game where it becomes exactly the opposite of that. One of the things that makes this game so instructive is the fact that it does become the opposite. All right, so back to the game. In the game, white plays knight e4, putting more pressure on the knight. But he already has the bishop pair, so black could just give up the bishop for the knight, and even though white's still killing black, it really doesn't do anything special, but trading when you're winning is good. So black takes, white takes back, and black hits the bishop. Well, right now white could say, I've got that pawn attacked twice, it's only guarded twice, so I can't take it right away, but what happens if I remove the guard and I attack his queen? Well, he can't take my bishop because I'll take his queen. And if he takes my bishop with the queen, I can take this pawn with the bishop and that guards my knight. Or if he takes with the pawn, here we go again with that checkmate. I can play check here, and then, let's see, what's the best move here? Mr. Stockfish. Stockfish says everything wins, but he likes bishop takes h7 the best. A little unnecessarily complicated, but you get the point. He's kind of opening him up here, which is really good. I guess you could argue, well, if he takes with a pawn, he's got 2 pawns attacking a piece, but if worse comes to worse, you can always take this pawn and hit the rook. And now if he takes the knight, you can just take the rook and you win the exchange. Or if he saves the rook, then you could save the knight. Let's say knight takes c4. Doesn't have to do that. If you want to mate the king, you could play knight to g4. And white's ahead by, again, 9.5 pawns. So bishop takes knight is a pretty good move here. White decided not to do that. He just moved the bishop back. Black says, let me get my queen out of the pin now. White says, now I'll put the pressure on the knight, but now there's no pin here, so black could just move the knight if he wants to. Black guards the knight with the other knight. White says, let me put more pressure on that f6, also get my queen developed so I can get my rook out of here and start hitting this pawn. Black has a 4-on-2 majority here, He's down a piece, but he's got the majority. So if white does nothing and black can push that pawn all the way down the board, then maybe black could get some counterplay. But right now, a piece for 2 pawns is monstrous. And we notice from white having done all these things the way he did, his lead has dropped from 8 to 4. 4 is still enough to win easily. And notice if we look at all the moves here that black has, again, you know, it's not like he's got a lot of good things that he can do here. All right, so let's make the move. Knight takes g4. Of course, white's going to recapture. Queen takes g4. Black plays rook fe8. White's advantage here is back up to 6. Let's show only the top 3 moves for the moment. Make the board bigger for everybody. Okay, rook fe8. White plays h4. That's not a bad move. This h-pawn could cause him to try to push his pawns and create weaknesses. It also, in some lines, prevents back rank mates, although right now the queen is guarding the h2 square. Not a bad move. Black trades. White should say, oh good, you're trading when I'm winning. That's exactly what I want. White takes back. Now white's lead has grown to almost 7 pawns with that trade. That trade gives white control of the file. Black attacks the queen with knight to e5. White plays his best move, queen to f5, threatening queen takes h7 check. Not mate yet, but close. It would be check, and the king would go there, and then the rook would help participate in a mating attack. So now black plays knight to d3. Okay, well, white's winning. This game's easy. This is a really good knight here. The knight's attacking the rook. He's threatening to take it. What's the best way to save the rook? Well, it's easy. Win that pawn, and that gets rid of his nice pawns. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. One of the 6 things you want to do when you're way ahead is keep it simple. That's the simplest thing to do. Keep it simple. The 6 things you do when you're way ahead, if you haven't seen the other videos on this, and this is another one of those games where you're way ahead, so I highly recommend those other videos. One's called When You're Way Ahead, It's a Different Game. The other video on my channel is called How Not to Play When Way Ahead. And this game is a little bit of how not to play, as you'll see in the next few moves. The 6 things are: think defense first. Think defense first has almost nothing to do with playing defensively. I always get misquoted. Think defense first has to do with the ordering of your thought process. Play defensively is not a thought process. That's actually what moves you should play on the board. Think defense first has nothing to do with the moves you play on the board. It has to do with how your mind is thinking and what order you're thinking things in. So think defense first is very, very, very different from play defensively. But think defense first. Keep it simple, the KISS principle. Make fair trades of pieces, not necessarily pawns. We recently did a video on whether or not you should trade pawns when you're way ahead. The 4th one is use all your pieces all the time. White's doing that. The fifth one is don't worry about the little things. Like, for instance, here, if you give up the bishop pair to win that pawn, don't worry about it. You're ahead a whole bishop. That should win the game easily. And the last one is don't get into unnecessary time trouble. This game was played at a 45-45 rate. Normally in a chess game, you want to run your clock at the end of the game all the way almost to 0 because you want to use almost all your time and play the best you can. If you watch grandmasters play, they almost always take almost all their time. That's what you want to do. But if you're way, way, way ahead, you could leave yourself an extra 5 or 6 minutes on the clock to make sure you don't get into any kind of time trouble where you have to play fast and throw away the win. So here, the only move I would really look at is bishop takes d3. Now, what's going to happen in the next few moves is white's going to play some moves that are perfectly okay, but only if you're a computer. Remember earlier we said white could do almost anything and he's winning? Let's take a look at the top 5 moves here. Okay, there's the top 5. And you could see they range from plus 7.6 to plus 7. Well, notice not only are they all very high numbers like 7, but they're also all very close. 7.6 to 7.1. That means if white makes any reasonable move, if he doesn't let black just take off his rook, he doesn't have to take the knight and win the pawn. If he just makes any reasonable move, he's just winning. But it really doesn't matter that much what he does as long as he makes a nice safe move. But bishop takes d3 is by far the easiest move. Now what's interesting is white made the second best move, rook e7, but that's a very, very dangerous move to make because you have to calculate everything very, very precisely and make sure you play all the moves right, and you have to look ahead and figure out why that move is safe. And it's not that easy. So for a human to play such a move, it's a big deal that you would be causing yourself problems. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, you have to understand removal of the guard. If you put a piece on a square where your opponent can't take it because you have a piece guarding it, if he can either capture that piece that's guarding your piece or attack it, let's say attack it with something worth less, AWL, then you almost have to consider that that piece is not really guarding the other piece. It's sort of like you're standing on a ladder and you're changing the light bulb, but your enemy is down there and has the opportunity to pull your ladder away from you. Well, if someone's down there with the opportunity to pull the ladder away from you, then you can't consider yourself very safe. Well, that's what white does with rook e7. Notice the computer says that move is the 5th best move right now, which means it's +7, so it's perfectly safe. But it's only safe if you can play like a computer or a very, very, very strong player. It's not safe if you just realize, oh, the only reason his queen can't take it is because my bishop's guarding it. But what happens if black plays f6, hitting the bishop and removing the guard on the rook at the same time? Well, all of a sudden you have a problem. And you have to resolve this. Well, you can't wait till he does that and then go, uh-oh, what do I do now? I have a name for that. I call that hope chess. Hope chess isn't just when you make a move and hope your opponent doesn't see something. Hope chess to me means you make a move without looking at all your opponent's checks, captures, and threats, and then when he makes a threat like this that you didn't see, you go, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? And you hope there's an answer. Well, obviously there is an answer because the computer is telling you that there is. And right now the computer says you still have a bunch of moves that'll give you a big advantage, but now you're going to have to start finding them. Before, you were in no trouble, and now you're asking for trouble. This is exactly the opposite of what you want to do. You don't want to get yourself into a position where you're way ahead, and now all of a sudden your opponent has counter tactics. Okay, so white starts out with a good move here. He plays rook to d7, and now black plays queen to e5, attacking the queen that's not guarded. Well, what's the best way to save the white queen? It's to take off that knight again. Take the knight, which guards the queen, and now if he takes the bishop, you could just trade queens, and now there's no pawn attacking your bishop anymore, and you could just play rook takes d5, and you know, black has these two nice pawns here, but they're not really going anywhere. That pawn's going to be blocked, and the bishop and the rook are stopping this. You could just march your king over and take it off. So the easiest move for white here is bishop takes, and of course black can't play pawn takes this bishop because he'll lose his queen, or white could even look and say, maybe I have checkmate. Check, here, checkmate. Donald Byrne used to tell me, win his queen first and checkmate him after that. Don't play for checkmate and then go, oh, whoops, I missed it. I could have won his queen. That's the Donald Byrne rule. So white can just play bishop takes d3 here, and that's a good move to play because right now you've got a queen attack, you've got a bishop attack, so it makes sense to start taking off his pieces first, which makes it hard for him to end up ahead. If you do the first captures, it's hard for him to end up ahead. It's just like in boxing when, let's say you have two beginning boxers and the only three things they're allowed to do is dance to the left, dance to the right, or try to hit him in the nose. Well, everybody should try to hit him in the nose, and if you hit him in the nose first, he's probably not going to hit you in the nose because he's probably going to fall backwards when you hit him in the nose. So hitting him in the nose protects your nose really well. Well, same thing here in chess. Taking off his pieces is kind of the best way to protect yourself here. You still want to figure things out. You still want to analyze it. But if you can get away with this move right here, it works. Now, could you also take the queen? Yes, you could. And it turns out that's what white did in the game. But again, he has to calculate all this and make sure he can figure it all out. So he takes the queen, and black takes back. And now look at those top 5 moves again. Now you see white's gotten into a whole different type of ball game. He's still up those same 7 pawns, 6.6. But now, if he doesn't find the right move, his lead will drop to 2. And if he doesn't find either of those moves, black is even. Well, now it's not just the white's winning no matter what he does. What's happening here is white's only winning if he figures it out correctly. So what should white do? Well, what white has to realize is that if black takes the bishop, his knight won't be guarded. But right now, the knight's attacking the rook. So what the rook needs to do is attack the knight. Well, when you have to do that, you have to ask yourself, what are all the ways to attack that knight? Not just what's the first way to do it. Well, there's a difference between rook takes d5 and rook e7, and it's not just that when you play rook d5 you win a pawn. It's that when you play rook e7, he can move the knight now and attack your rook. But if you play rook takes d5, he can't. So by far the best move, and the one that wins the game easily, is rook takes d5, with the idea that if he plays f takes g5, you play rook takes e5, you say, sure, you can have a pawn, be my guest, and the rook and the bishop are killing the rook, even though black has 2 pawns in the endgame. Again, these pieces are active. You can see +6, +6, +5. The reason I'm showing the top 5 moves is I want you to see white doesn't, it's no longer a narrow win here. Once white finds that line, he's winning pretty much no matter what, any reasonable move that he plays. So that's what white has to play, and white needs to find that move. But earlier, he didn't need to find anything. He could have done almost anything. And here, white realizes he needs to attack the knight, but unfortunately, he attacks it the wrong way, and he plays here, and now you can see his advantage is dropping way down if black finds the move knight c6. Black plays king f8. Well, that's a mistake for lots of reasons. One is, white can now, if he's worried about losing a piece, he can just give up the exchange. He can play rook takes e5, f takes e5, and then like bishop takes h7. And of course his advantage has dropped, but he's not losing a piece, he's only losing the exchange. But white has much better moves than that. For instance, he can play rook e6 and still take the knight if he takes, and if the king goes here, then white has bishop here guarding the rook, and if black again takes the bishop, white will take. If black tries to remove the guard with g6, then white has something like rook takes f6 check, followed by moving the bishop. Tricky, and white doesn't want tricky here, but he is still winning. But unfortunately now he has to find ideas to do this, and he needs to play a move like rook e6 or rook takes e5. Rook e6 is the only move that wins easily now. But white has put himself in a position where he has to play the right moves. By starting all these complications with the move rook e7 and then not playing bishop takes d3, the next move, or 2 moves later, he's now created positions where he has to play accurately. Okay, so white plays bishop takes f6, but that's giving up an entire piece when you could just give up the exchange. I see this mistake all the time in amateur games. Yes, it's true, he's hitting the rook and he's hitting the bishop. Well, but if you take the pawn, you're getting a couple pawns for your bishop. If you take rook takes e5, then you're only giving up the exchange and you can get a pawn right back. So this is a pretty good example of don't lose pieces when you could only lose the exchange. By the way, a lot of people think losing the exchange means coming out behind in a trade. It doesn't. In chess, the verb exchange means trade, but the noun the exchange means a rook for a bishop or a knight. So if you win the exchange, you win a rook for a bishop or a knight. If you lose the exchange, or here you sacrifice the exchange, you give up a rook for a bishop or a knight. That's the exchange. That's a noun. All right, so white blunders and plays bishop f6, and now you could see for the first time black's all the way back to 0-1-8 here. f6, rook takes h7, and now black should keep even with a move like rook e8. He does, his best move. Now white could trade rooks, but the knight against the bishop with the even pawns would be pretty close. The engine says you have nothing better than to do that. Bishops are a little bit better than knights in endgames, but this pawn is very dangerous. It's a protected passed pawn, or it will be protected once it comes down the board. But white has nothing better than that with a draw. White plays f4 and hits the knight. Now the knight needs to come here and threaten mate. Then white would have to do something after knight here. He'd have to do something like trade rooks to stop the mate. Or I guess, could he move the king? No, he can't move the king. The only way to save the game now is to trade the rooks. So that's what black should do, and black makes a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake now. He plays knight d3. Why is that a terrible mistake? That looks like a nice outpost for the knight. And the answer is, it lets white trade off every piece on the board. And if you let someone trade off all the pieces on the board, you have to evaluate the king and pawn endgame. Well, let's do that right now. Rook h8 check. King comes up. We'll take the rook. He has to take me back. I take the knight. He has to take me back. And now I play king f2. And I'm inside the square. And this pawn cannot be guarded by this king. Let's say black plays f5 here to stop the white from playing the g-pawn up. White plays here, black plays here, white takes. Look at the evaluation now. Now we're back to that +9 on every move. White's winning a million ways from Sunday here. He's up a clear pawn in a king and pawn endgame. If you don't know how to win these kind of endgames, I suggest you watch my video, King and 5 pawns against King and 4. Guess what we've got here? King and 5 pawns against King and 4. So White is back to winning on everything that he would play, if he just does that. But that's an easy line to see, because when your opponent gives you the chance to trade every piece on the board, you have to ask yourself, if I trade every piece on the board and go into a king and pawn endgame, who's winning? Well, here the answer is easy. You trade, he takes. You trade, he takes. You can't let him get a queen. You got to move your king to f1 or f2. Oh, guess what? This pawn is falling. Oh, guess what? I'm up upon the endgame. In fact, if black doesn't play f5, if he plays here, it's even easier. We just play this move. And now black's really in trouble. If he goes there, we go here. He can't do anything if he ever pushes here. We can push here. If he goes here, we can just take. And he can never take this pawn, because that would put his king on a lower rank than my pawn, and I just get a queen in 3 moves. So white can just trade everything off and win. So this move here, knight to d3, takes the game from black is slightly better back to white is winning completely easily. And again, it all has to do with what happens if I trade everything off. And you can see that the engine again is saying, you've only got one line to win. If you trade everything, you win. And if you don't trade everything, it's a draw or worse. What does white do? He tries to undermine the knight, but that gives the rook a chance to come down and start attacking the bishop and the king. The rook comes down to the 7th rank, hits the bishop. The bishop can't go to d1 or b1 because rook e1 check will win the bishop. So white says, well, I'll take the knight, and black says, thanks for this monster pawn that you can't stop thanks to my other pawn that's in the way. White could play king to f1 here. If he plays king f1, as you can see, Stockfish is now saying black has 4 moves that win easily. It's good to see the top 4 lines here so we can see how easily he's winning. The engine says the easiest way to win here is to keep the king blocked off with rook here. If he plays rook here, guard the pawn with your rook. If he guards his pawn, now you can push this pawn and you're going to get a queen. Okay, back to the game. So in the game, white didn't play king f1. He just played rook d7. That's kind of capitulation, but he is in big trouble. Black says d2. White says, but I can take the pawn and you can't get a queen. And black says, well, that's true on this move, but what about the next move after I check and then I get a queen? And white says, oh yeah, guess I'm losing my rook. Guess this game's over. And white resigns. Stockfish now says black is minus 6.5. But white's not going to have anything left on the board except for a passed h-pawn. And that's not enough to play on, so white properly resigns here. Very, very, very instructive game. I did this video a little bit longer than normal because we had so many instructive points. If you're one of those people that thinks you should only read master games and only read master game books as opposed to like my book, The World's Most Instructive Amateur Game Book, you can see how much you can learn from games like this. And I tell everybody right in the introduction of that book, of course you want to read lots of master games too to see what's right, but that doesn't mean you don't want to read any amateur games. That's going too far. Yes, 97% of master games, 3% of amateur. Seems like not too unreasonable. All right, you can like the video, you can subscribe to the channel, but the best thing you can do is tell all your chess friends about my channel. You know, get out there and say, hey, I'm going to be going to the chess club this week. Maybe I'll write down Dan's channel name, Dan Heisman Chess, and tell everybody, hey, YouTube channel, Dan Heisman Chess. Check it out. It's got a lot of good instructive stuff to help you get to be a better chess player. Okay, thanks a lot. We hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you next time. Bye.